Welcome, everybody, to Leading Through Growth. This is a podcast where we have honest conversations with growth-minded leaders about what it takes to build high-performing teams, strong cultures, and organizations that can leave an impact. I'm Tom Campbell, Executive Coach, Career Strategist, and CEO of Stella Nova Coaching. In this episode, we're talking to Maria Roberts about what it takes to build a strong culture from the inside out, how leaders show up in everyday moments, everyday ways, and why the way we work together now matters more than Maria. Hi, Maria. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Tom? Thank you for
I'm
having
good.
me.
Very welcome. Maria is the head of channel and commercial sales and owner of Five Star Painting, a locally owned and operated residential and commercial painting company in Washington, D.C. area, Virginia, and Maryland. Maria's story is really very interesting, full of insight and surprises. And whether you're managing a team, running a family or a family business, or just trying to lead more authentic, you're going to want to stay. So welcome, Maria, and congratulations on your growing empire.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I do consider it almost an empire at this point.
You've recently taken over Maryland,
Yes.
where you go to Northern Virginia alone for a while, and now, oh, yeah, really exciting. Tell us a little bit about your role and Five Star Painting.
So, when I originally came on board, I had left a corporate position, not by choice, but basically came in as a general manager. At the time, it pretty much was my husband and my son-in-law, and we had one administrative assistant and one additional estimator. But things were kind of still up in the air, like, making sure the bills were getting paid and making sure the painters were showing up when they needed to be. We didn't have a really good system in place that allowed us to scale, which is something that we always wanted to do. So I came in as originally as the general manager, pretty much making sure everything on the day-to-day operations were being handled, making sure, accounts were taken care of, painters were showing up, um, project managers were on time, customers were happy, just fill in the gap from what we had previously, because again, it pretty much was a very small operation. And we knew we wanted to grow, but we did not have systems in place to do that. And so by becoming a general manager, it freed up some mental space for the owners at that time to start thinking about how to scale.
Okay. Now, a lot of people like to talk about the work situation, especially a lot of leaders like to talk about their teams. In your case, Five Star Painting, literally your family. Talk about what that means for how you.
So what's very interesting about Five Star Painting in general, we're part of a larger parent company called Neighborly. A lot of the franchise owners are family owned businesses. So we're talking fathers and sons. In this case, it was my husband and my son-in-law. Then my daughter and I came on board, and then it became 4 owners. And then as we started scaling, we went from owning what was considered one market in Manassas, Virginia, which covered the 66 corridor out west to Gainesville and Haymarket. We purchased several other markets in Northern Virginia, which expanded us. And then, of course, that meant we had to scale. So having my daughter came on board, she became what would have been our social media and HR. And then my role sort of changed a little bit, becoming more of the what we now call channel sales. And I'll talk a little bit later about what that means. But expanding our roles became very important, and then hiring more people became very important. And then we started realizing we were still missing many of the positions that we needed to create in order to, again, free up a lot of mental space that's needed to scale. If we're doing all the work, then we have no time to think about strategies. So, we actually have 5 adult children. My daughter, I have a son, 2 sons and 2 other daughters, so a total of 5 children who are all adults. And they all have unique, personal and professional skill set that we tapped into. And what was interesting is these were actually built over a course of 15 years of being a family band. So before we even became Five Star Painting as a family, business, we were actually a family band touring all over, up and down the East Coast. We've been to Hawaii, Carnival cruise, etc. So we were building a business model through the band that then transitioned into what is now Five Star Painting.
I love that because family culture, and then that bled into your company culture. Talk about, and I love the family band. And I did go look at some of the videos. Awesome. Um, talk about the crossover, the concepts of culture and values, and business and culture and values and concepts. How do you see?
Yeah. So obviously, for some families, and I won't say it's for every family, for some families, you're training your children up in certain values that maybe you grew up with. And so we were blessed to have multi-generational family members all living together in the same household. And when we were running the band, everybody then still had their own role to play in the band, whether they were the guitar, the drummer, the vocalist, etc. But other members of the family were also, the making sure the gigs were found and making sure we had the roadies who were bringing all the
You
equipment.
need roadies. Yep.
Yes, we needed our roadies. And then, of course, we had to have the financial support. So we had, dad the bank. And then even like the grandmothers who were providing sustenance, like they were bringing the food on the road and that kind of thing and taking care of any kind of injuries that might have happened. So everyone kind of had roles and we learned how to solve problems together. And I think that is so important when you're building culture because one of the things that is important when you are building culture is that you're learning how to solve problems. And if you don't have a good foundation in that sense, it's really hard you can build culture, but can you maintain it? And so we were able to take what we had learned as this family band and building culture and translate it into Five Star Painting. But I think what was most important is like we didn't all just come over and become Five Star Painting at one time. It was over a course of, at this point, we're going into our 5th year. It was a slow process as we needed to scale and we needed to fill out certain positions and training, in this case, our children to fill those positions and giving them an option to say, what position would you like to fill? And then giving them the tools and the training they needed. So, for instance, I have one of my younger daughters. She decided she wanted to pursue the finance and bookkeeping part. So we sent her, she's been taking bookkeeping classes. And we've been using our bookkeeper and our CPA and other resources to help train her to do our daily bookkeeping. Our youngest daughter just graduated. I say just graduated, and I keep saying that, but it's been a year from Parsons School of Design. She is our color consultant, and she also helps assist her brother, who does commercials for a living in our marketing and advertising. So everyone has like their part to play again, and they've all learned what their part is. And one of the things that we also, as a family, have been able to do is learn where our lanes are and try not to overstep our lanes. And that's very difficult when you are dealing with a family business.
I would imagine so, because you've got staying in your lane is hard enough in the works. Family, you don't have those sort of natural hierarchical boundaries that come with work environment. What are the, obviously there are some benefits to being so close, working in office, not an office, business setting. What are some of the challenges that come up? Maybe not come up for another.
I mean, you would think that a big challenge would be being able to turn it off and not be business when we're family. But I think because we had had the previous experience of learning what it felt like to be a family business before we had Five Star, that we will say, this is a no business talk zone. Or we'll have a weekend of family events and we'll say, there's no business talk for this weekend. And we'll catch each other and say, oh, nope, we're not having that discussion. We'll talk about it on Monday. So we're really good at being able to turn our hats around. We can turn our family hats on, turn them around and be business. And even during the day, we do a lot of our work through WhatsApp, and we actually have multiple chats. Even though the same people are in these chats, the chat itself has been titled, whether it be finance or it's the estimating or it's production, like whatever it might be. We know that we're only discussing that particular topic in that chat. So it helps us stay on track. It helps us stay in our lanes, and it helps us understand what we are actually trying to accomplish based on the conversation that's happening within that particular titled WhatsApp chat.
It sounds to me like you mentioned the importance of being intentional when you're trying to scale. You mentioned that a couple of. It sounds like what I'm hearing you say. You're intentional about a lot of. You're intentional about boundaries. You're intentional about scale. Intentional about role. When you were a band, not everybody could be a drummer. Not everybody could be a lead singer. Not everybody could play rhythm guitar because that wouldn't.
And when that was happening, it did not work out. When
Right.
everybody wanted to fill those places, that wasn't their seat.
Right. And so being intentional about all the different pieces of this, it sounds like it's a really, really important thing for you as your business is growing and scaling, right? Like you
Yes.
said, when you joined, you were sort of a general manager until being a general manager wasn't necessary anymore. And to scale.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
So it really was about like specializing. If you think of a cell, when a cell is created, it's just a cell, but then it starts to divide and it becomes a very specific part of our body, whether it be skin, whether it be
Interesting.
hair, whether it's our legs, whatever it might be. And that's sort of what happened is we went from needing a general manager to actually needing to specialize. So, we needed somebody who was going to make sure that the painters showed up and that the project managers were on time. I could not continue to do that as we were continuing to grow because we went from maybe having 5 projects a week to 15 projects a week. And one person cannot handle that.
Right.
So we had to bring other people on. And then eventually I had to offboard that because my role was changing to larger, more projects that required more handholding because of the clientele that we are working with. So because of that specialization, and I think that that's what's been most important. Even our children are teaching us that because they were learning that in their work. When they're in their day jobs, they were learning that. And so they were bringing that to us and saying, you know what, we need to specialize. I'm going to focus on this. She's going to focus on that. You're going to focus on that. And then what we started doing is on a quarterly basis, we kind of have a reset where we all come together and we remind each other what our roles are in the business. And on a weekly basis, when we're having our staff meeting, we have we call it keys to our culture. And we read like these 5 or 6 tenets that says, we do this, we do that. And and this is how we're going to grow. And so we remind ourselves on a weekly basis and we remind ourselves on a quarterly basis to reset so that we aren't falling off the rails and someone else who's not the lead singer doesn't try to take over the band. But so that's what we've learned in as we're specializing.
So the intentionality goes a lot farther than just scaling. It goes to culture.
Yes.
You are being very intentional, keeping these to the culture front of the staff. Years ago, I worked for a nonprofit, national nonprofit. And there was this clever little, one sentence thing, sort of our mission. Every meeting we had, whether it was a small staff meeting or a big meeting, we all started with that sentence. We just repeated. And it was so silly after a while. It felt. But when it came to decision, somebody always brought that up. Well, how does this fit with this?
It
How does this
reminds
fit
you
with
of
our
what your
culture?
mission is.
Our
Right.
mission, right. So I love that. Keys to your culture. Would you later after this, would you share them with me and I'll link them?
Absolutely. I'll
to the
send them to you.
podcast. I
Yes.
think it'd be
Yep.
really interesting.
And they
Because
and they evolve. They do evolve as we are out there doing the work. We realize that that particular tenant doesn't work for us anymore. So they have evolved, and part of us scaling is also bringing in other owners and sharing what we've been doing and
Mhm.
bringing them into our culture and asking them, what do you think you would like to see as get bigger? So we're not just like the end all be all. Like, we're not bringing it to our other owners because we share ownership with some of the other markets. Uh, we're asking them to be part of the culture, and how can we bring you into the culture, and what would you like to see be part of that culture?
and that's a really good point. When I'm coaching executives, I make the point where while the executive sort of at the top of the team pyramid, right? The executive has an outsized role in setting culture, but it's not the only. Everybody, from the top to the very, person at the very bottom, very front line, all contribute to the culture. The culture. Now there is an outsized role, and it sounds like what you have incorporated into this sort of very intentional culture setting framework is bringing in everybody into sort of the conversation about what you want.
Exactly. And that's why our keys to our culture do evolve, because we've got new minds, new thoughts, direction. And so once a year, and you've been a part of that, like once a year we have like our what our mission is going to be. And we
That's
kind of
right.
like, yeah, we kind of revolve all of our meetings around that for the year. And so having more minds involved has been really interesting to see how we can make this even bigger and better. And then we're not the only ones thinking because, we can be very short-sighted about it, because we're only seeing as far as our eyes are looking. And then to have a fresh perspective has been a big deal for us.
Right. Well, and you have and back to the idea of scaling and intentionality about scaling. Your culture can get, like, if a company is growing too fast, the culture can get lost,
Absolutely.
or not lost, because there's always a culture, but off the tracks.
Exactly.
It goes off the tracks from where you want it very, very quick, especially when you're acquiring
Other
new
markets, other
markets, new
other
people, and
employees, we're incorporating. And this is so my previous where I was working previously, I love startups, and I've been in a lot of startups, and that's why I like it so much, is because it's at that culture level.
yeah,
But then it gets to that tipping point where you can almost no longer scale the culture, because it has gotten too big. And when I left the company, we were just at that point. But every week we would have a meeting, and one of the question was, how do we keep the culture we currently have? And so it really is, that is alone, like, you need to have, almost feel like you have to have a culture counselor, almost like somebody who's like the keeper of
yeah,
the culture, right?
yeah.
And so,
I love
and
that
I think
idea.
that right now, the keeper of the culture is our keys to the culture. Reading that every week is what's keeping us
Right.
where we are right now.
Well, and so I'm super curious. In your business, you've got the five-star painting professionals.
Hmm.
You've got the you and your family,
Our
or
leadership.
and leadership, and then you've got at the other end of the spectrum, you've got
Our
people that
painters.
you've hired to go out
Hmm.
and paint.
Right.
They're part time. Maybe they're not.
They're
They don't work for you.
subcontractors. They've got their own
Subcontractors.
business.
Do you? Is there a method or a way to communicate your culture to them, because they are your representatives on the ground?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that part of what makes Five Star a little different than other painting companies is we bring a production manager with us on site for our jobs. Other companies don't necessarily they have a crew leader, someone who runs and manages the crew, but
Mhm.
there's not necessarily a production manager who makes sure that the job is completed at the satisfaction of the customer.
I love
And
that.
they're kind of the liaison between the customer and the crew. In fact, my husband actually had a conversation with one of our crews today, because the crew leader, he wasn't at the job, which meant the job was slowly going off the rails, right?
Yeah.
So as he was like reminding him, and we actually provide a similar keys to our culture for our crews where we kind of have the do's and don'ts. And he reminded him that if you want to work with us, this is the level of expectation our customers have of us. And as a production manager, they're not staying on site the whole job. They're going to see multiple jobs throughout the day and then rotating and come back the next day. So they're not sitting on the jobs. We really rely on our crew leaders to be there to make sure the job is going as planned.
Right. You're not
So
micromanaging.
yeah, exactly. So we
Right.
just want to make sure that our customers are, they're getting what they expected. And so whenever we do bring any new crews on, they kind of go through they go through their own onboarding, and we do our own training with them because we do things very differently than other paint companies do. And it is really just it always comes back to the culture. And things that we do over the summer that's coming up right now that, again, being different than other paint companies,
Mhm.
we'll drop off drinks for them because it's hot outside. We provide sunscreen. We
Yeah.
give them
Oh,
the number to OSHA, and there's like a whole thing about sunstroke related, like there's a phone number to call. And so like we provide them all these tools that they're going to need beyond just showing up at the job. We want to make sure they're healthy. We make sure we talk to them about risk, things like they want to climb up 40 feet of ladder by themselves without
right.
anyone at the base, so training them to make sure that they're safe and what our expectations are.
And
so
these
they
aren't
know that we
these aren't
care about them.
just to clarify, these aren't people who are directly employed by
No.
Five Star. They are subcontractors
Correct.
to Five Star.
Right.
And you're treating them with that amount of respect and caring
Absolutely.
that you would provide members of your own family.
Absolutely. And, it's not trying to be political or anything, but the whole immigration, when it first came up, giving them resources so they knew who to call, because maybe for them, maybe it wasn't affecting them personally,
Right.
but they had family members or, they knew someone, and we set up mental health access. We got them immigration
Wow.
access. Like we want to make sure that they are safe, that they can handle, the job, and that even from not only physically, but emotionally and mentally, because they
Wow.
are part of our family.
Right. Well, that's wonderful. So as you're growing, curious about, again, this intentionality and the scaling, um, you're, you're intentionally scaling your culture while you're scaling your company. What's coming up that has changed the company, the team, the organization in some way? It's gonna mean- And what's it going to mean for you as a leader?
Yeah, the biggest change we recently had was changing me from being a general manager to the channel/commercial sales. One of the things that Five Star in general has done is moved from just a residential painter to now having a commercial division, which they didn't have
Mm.
before. And it came by people like me, our markets and several other markets where we were focusing on commercial, and we knew things needed to change for us in a sense when it came to residential, because we're dealing with economic issues, and residential wasn't always wasn't hitting all the time, right?
Right.
The way we find residential is through marketing, and that's dollars that we have to spend. But with commercial, we can introduce ourselves and go out networking and meet other general contractors. We can join networking events. We can join networking teams like BNI. And then that was actually filling the gap, especially because it's very seasonal when it comes to residential. So come around November, we don't see maybe a residential customer until February, March. So we needed something to fill that gap. And so we decided last year that we were going to build our commercial side more than we currently had. It was about 10 to 15% of our total revenue.
Hmm.
So we decided November, we made a decision to make it about 35% so about a third of our total revenue. And so part of that was having me focus only on the commercial opportunities and the channel sales, which is meaning those larger projects that build partnerships like with realtors and property managers and so forth that allow us to continue to have residual income.
Mhm.
And then, of course, building larger projects with like general contractors and the government contracting and so forth. So that was one of the biggest things that we did. And when I today was a good example of how well it's going. We have it has surpassed that 35%. It's almost at 50% in
Wow.
just in the first 4 months of us making that intentional decision to change our course to go to doing more commercial. And so now we have to temper how much we have with commercial with our residential, because obviously we don't want to um, alienate our residential customers, because that still is our bread and butter. But we also run into the risk of with commercial, the revenue stream, though it's fantastic, the payouts can be, 60, 90, 120 days down the road.
Oh, yeah.
So we have to, make sure our painters are still getting paid, make sure the bills are still getting paid, make sure the materials are still being bought. So we have to temper. We can't have, there's a tipping point in that where if we go past it, then we put ourselves in a bad situation financially. So those are the things that we are constantly looking at strategically. So I have a lot of meetings with my husband about how far should we be going, because it is going so well right now.
Right. You're co-owner.
I'm a co-owner along with
You have a meeting with your co-owner,
yeah, we're having meetings with our co-owner. Yes.
but
Yes.
not during non-business time.
No.
Only
Oh
during-
no. No, it's funny. We're driving around and we literally have our phone, well, our earbuds in, and we're talking to each other in between our estimates, in between our project starts and so forth. So I talk to him literally all day long, and it's just us making, like, we'll make a lot of notes and then we have to like go through the notes. So on Thursdays, we have a set time where we spend 2 hours basically brain dumping all the things we talked about for the week and the notes that we've collected, and actually doing something with those notes, whether tossing out the ideas that
Yeah.
aren't going to work now or figuring out how we're going to make that idea work. So
So I'm just really impressed by, yeah, I go back to this idea of intentionality. Very intentional about everything you do, which means you're intentional about your growth, which means you're intentional about your culture building and the scaling of both the growth and the culture. But you're not scaling so fast. You've been very intentional about that, because scale too fast, then you're off the tracks again.
exactly.
Yeah.
It
So-
is very much a balancing act every single.
Yeah, I bet. If you could go back to your younger self, younger leader, however you wanted to find that, and give yourself one piece of advice, what do you think that?
I think don't question myself. I have good
when-
ideas.
And the other part of this question is, when would you go back?
I would go back 25 years when I became, let me see, 25 years when so September 11th, 2001. We all know that day. My husband and I started our first business. And
Wow.
we could not figure out why nobody was looking at us when we were walking into these doctor's offices. Nobody would talk to us, and we couldn't figure it out. And of course we figured it out, right? And I looked at my husband and I said, well, of course we get our act together and this is what happens. But we stuck to it. And I think what I learned
Wow.
is I have good ideas. And I allowed a lot of people to tell me that my ideas were not valid. And then, of course, as I get older, I start sticking to my guns, and I know that it works. And then I'm now harvesting the fruits of of that labor of trusting myself.
Trusting yourself. And I imagine there's a piece of that, if I'm not mistaken, you incorporate into the culture of the company for
Absolutely.
people to trust themselves
Absolutely.
so they can bring up ideas, because you guys, the top, can't be the only idea machine.
Absolutely. Yep. And no idea I tell you, we have one daughter. She is a mind bank. She comes up with the most brilliant ideas, and we just look at her and go, "Huh, that is an amazing idea." And so giving them the freedom and the space to be able to speak their mind, and that's the one thing we have instilled in our kids. They could always tell us what was on their mind, and now they've been able to take that into their workplace, and now they bring it to, their own workplace because they're all owners as well.
Yeah.
And so being able, again, taking that, wishing that I could stick by my guns back then, and knowing I had good ideas, but I was able to help my children understand that they could do the same, and
Yeah.
giving them that. And now
It's a
being able to do
wonderful
that.
legacy.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Maria, thank you for being with us today. I feel like I could talk to you all afternoon. Congratulations again on your growth, on the strength of your company and the strength of your family. I really appreciate you sharing.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed I love talking about it.
Well, you have a lot of reasons to be proud of what you've accomplished. And again, huge thank you for agreeing to be profiled on Leading Through Growth and sharing your story. May you and your family's success continue well into the future. And that was Maria Roberts, the head of channel and commercial sales, and along with her family, one of the owners of 5-Star, growing residential and commercial painting company in the greater Washington, D.C. And I'm Tom Campbell, CEO of Stellanova Coaching, and this has been Leading Through Growth. If today's conversation sparks something in you, I hope you'll carry it forward into your work, your leadership, life. And for more tools, insights, or to connect with me directly, please visit StellanovaCoaching.com. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time at the intersection of purpose, progress, and people.